video, I'm going to cover the first chapter of The Voice of Reason and the flashback story that goes along with it. So if you haven't read up to page 38 in this book, please do so. If you don't have this book, or you have a PDF or some other version, it just includes the first chapter and the story of the Striga and stops before The Voice of Reason chapter 2. So again, make sure you read it before this breakdown because I will absolutely ruin the story for you if you don't. So The Last Wish contains 7 chapters, all titled The Voice of Reason, 1 through 7, and sandwiched between those chapters are flashback stories about recent events in Geralt's life. The chapters titled The Voice of Reason take place in the present and are him at a temple while he heals following a bad injury. And I'll have a video covering the Temple of Melatella in my chapter 2 breakdown, so if you don't know about this goddess and her followers, I'll get to it, I believe, next week. But that's not important for this chapter and flashback story. So again, this video, I want to talk about the first Voice of Reason chapter and then the flashback story that actually shows why he's at the temple healing. In the Voice of Reason chapter 1, we aren't sure yet where Geralt is, or even if this is Geralt. While at the temple, a woman comes to where a man is resting, she takes off her clothes and mounts him, and they have sex. This leads us right into our first short story flashback. So we learn that Geralt has come to Wyzim to cure King Fulstus's daughter, Ada, who was cursed in the womb to be a Striga. A Striga is a woman that was cursed and transformed into a monster. In Ada's case, she was cursed before she was even born, which just seems so awful. Once a Striga, the cursed female is full of hate towards all living beings and will kill, usually eat them, without any remorse or hesitation. An easy task as a Striga, as you are incredibly powerful and fast. We're led to believe that they only come out on the full moon to hunt. I'm going to be doing a lore video on Strigas that are open up to the entire channel, so that won't actually be private. I should have a Patreon post explaining that the lore and history videos are going to be open to everyone on my channel, and then these chapter breakdowns and all my podcast segments are only available to you guys. But if you want more information on the Striga, you can check out that lore video. They're terrifying. So Geralt comes to Wyzim after seeing a proclamation nailed to crossways and taverns to save the princess. Really, why I like this story is it gives you a good look at the abilities of a Witcher and the means they go about getting special abilities to fight monsters. It also shows Geralt's very ironic sense of humor and that he's willing to do what he needs to do to get the job done. Also, it's the first time in the Witcher world that we learn the force of will is enough to do some really bad things. Like the tagline of the Netflix TV series The Witcher coming out, sometimes the worst monsters are the ones we create. This is very much so true in the books. Video games too, but we're talking about the books. Alright, so let's jump into the story. Geralt comes to the Fox Inn, which has a seedy reputation that makes it less full than other inns, and there's actually only one other inn in this area. In there, he orders beer. However, when he asks for a room, the bartender tells him to go to the other inn, and Geralt doesn't want to. At first, the bartender doesn't like the look of Geralt's white hair, though he isn't old, and dusty and dirty boots. Oh, and the sword strapped to his back like a bow or quiver, which no one did. After the innkeeper discovers that Geralt's accent is Rivian, he especially does not want to serve him and tells him that they do not want any scum from Rivia in this inn or this area in general. Wyzim is a decent town. And you don't actually learn it in this book, so I don't know if maybe this is spoiling it, but Geralt isn't really from Rivia. He just adopted that accent to make him seem more approachable and human-like to people, because people like to know that you're from a certain place and you have a home, so he took on the accent. So he doesn't even think to defend Rivians, because even Geralt thinks, who likes Rivians? The other patrons at the bar join in on insulting Geralt and the Rivians and tell him to leave. Geralt says he'll finish his beer first, which of course leads to the men attempting to help Geralt finish to get him out of the bar, and Geralt taking his sword and messing up 3 men very quickly. He even has time to pull a dagger from his boot, our first demonstration of just how badass Geralt is. Geralt uses a sign to make the guards obey him and take him to the Castellan of Wyzim, Velarad. Once alone with Velarad, the man wants to hear out Geralt before executing him for murdering in his town. He knows Geralt is a witcher and asks to see the witcher emblem, a round medallion on a silver chain with the picture of a wolf head bearing its fangs. And the medallion is very important to witchers for a few reasons. First and foremost, it is the silver symbol of the witcher's profession, and each one is made to represent the school a witcher comes from. Geralt comes from the wolf school, so his medallion is shaped like a wolf's head. The medallion has a second and important task, though. It is sensitive to magic and responds to all types of magic, spells, charms, curses, and even detects magical beings, vibrating and tugging on the chain when it does so. Though this isn't foolproof, you'll see later on that Geralt has used the medallion to test if someone is a monster. It does not detect every monster, so a witcher always needs to be on guard, even if their medallion is still. Through this meeting with Velorad, Geralt learns how Ada became a Striga. So King Felstis had a love affair with his sister and knocked up his sister, who was also named Ada. He named the child after his dead sister lover. Yeah, there's incest in the Witcher series too. People that were wanting more of that, you got it. After getting his sister pregnant, Felstis wanted to marry his sister, but luckily they talked him out of it. Especially since another neighboring area wanted their daughter, Delga, to marry Felstis. Unfortunately, Ada eventually gave birth, and both her and the baby didn't make it. What Ada gave birth to was so horrifying, one midwife jumped to her death from the tower window, and another midwife is still in a daze many years later. Instead of burning the horrifying baby, which would have been proper wisdom, Felstis instead demanded to bury her in a sarcophagus in the vaults beneath the palace with her dead mother. And for 7 years, nothing happened. Everything was quiet. And then, one full moon, 7 years later, shit went down. The child emerged from the tomb, having grown quite a bit in 7 years, and began her hunt for the living to devour. This is when Felstis sent for the Knowing Ones, or sorcerers, to try to figure out what to do. Interestingly, here's where we get our first look at how magic users are seen. Velorad considers them fools and swindlers, and that witchers inspire greater confidence in men. However, you'll note as the book goes on and you read the other books, witchers aren't always perceived in the best light. Basically, everyone is super prejudiced towards each other, so not only are the races prejudiced towards each other, humans, elves, dwarves, and so on, so are the different magic users and occupations. So sorceresses might have issues with witchers, which they do. Witchers have problems with the Knowing Ones because they treat them like dirt. And then you have priests and priestesses who do not like the heathens that use spells to do things. Instead, they call on the power of their gods and goddesses. So everyone has issues with everyone, basically. And just like our own world, the degree of prejudice depends on where you go and who you talk to. So the king had summoned sorcerers to figure out what to do with his daughter. While the wizards didn't agree on much, some saying to kill her in various ways, one Knowing One suggested that since the curse was magic, it could be undone, and that the princess turned back into human. The wizard explained that someone simply had to stay in the crypt overnight, and in the morning, the princess would be human. We learn that that Knowing One attempted to do so, and nothing was left of him but his hat and stick. But the king clung to that bit of knowledge, or what the Knowing One told him, and decided no one is to harm the Striga. We need to get people from all over to try to attempt to stay the night and cure my daughter. For saving his daughter, the king was willing to give 3,000 orens. Some that came were found to be frauds and taken care of very harshly, very harshly. Most of those that tried to break the curse became meals for the Striga. And so 7 years later, making the Striga princess 14 years old, no one had managed to break the curse. And the king had stayed safe as he built a separate palace, separate from the ruins where the Striga prowls. And in those 7 years, besides Geralt, we learned that other witchers had come to try to take care of the Striga, but once they learn, hey, it's not to be killed, they've shrugged and walked away, or they've observed the Striga and gone, fuck this, not gonna do this. Or they've died. However, there was a witcher we learn of who was given an offer by Velorad to pretend he was going to save the princess, but kill her instead so they could put the matter to rest and be given money afterwards. It never came of anything as the witcher GTFO'd when he saw the Striga. Velorad offers Geralt the same deal, pretend to want to cure the Striga, but instead kill it. Velerad doesn't believe the curse can be undone and believes that it happened because she was born of incest. He, of course, doesn't want the king to know what he's plotting or what he has been plotting. Geralt refuses and decides to meet the king, and here we get a better glimpse into the Witcher code, which doesn't really exist. Witchers usually bring up a code as a way to get out of something without saying they don't want to do it or share it. But in this chapter, you're led to believe, oh, there's a Witcher code. But yeah, you learn some fun things as you go on, which I'm really excited to share with you guys about. So the king has Geralt stay in the palace and be fed while men give him details he requires to do the job. He promises the 3,000 orens, but not the princess's hand in marriage like some are claiming. The king's men, including Velerad and Ostrit, fill him in on the Striga's eating habits and appearance. Both terrifying. They share with him a miller who survived an attack by the Striga, and the next day a soldier takes Geralt to the miller to talk with him. Geralt learns what he can from the miller, which is mostly just looking at the scars on the man's body so he can get an idea of what he's dealing with, and then after the miller leaves, the soldier is revealed to actually be the king who disguised himself and wants to have an unofficial meeting with Geralt. Though he wants Geralt not to harm the child, he understands that if it comes to it, Geralt may, whether due to self-defense or he realizes there's no hope for the king's daughter. The king wants him to at least try, though. But Geralt is pretty sure if he can survive, he can break the curse. And when he does, a physically normal 14-year-old girl will appear, but she might be mentally different for a while. Or maybe even forever. Geralt believes that she'll be on the level of a 3 or 4-year-old when she's cured, but with loving care, she can adjust and learn to be human. Geralt believes that she'll be on the level of a 3 or 4-year-old when she's cured, but with loving care, she can adjust and learn to be human. Now, I covered this in my Striga lore video, but there's not a lot of information on the Striga, so we can't say for sure what's the norm. So Ada was cursed in the womb, so she never got to experience what it was like to be a human. So since any female can be cursed and become a Striga, who's to say a 70-year-old woman gets cursed, becomes a Striga, then is cured 5 years later? She might be a normal person. There might not be anything different, and she might not have to learn anything. There's just not enough information to know for sure, though. Geralt also warns the king that after the princess is cured, that there's going to be some amulets and rituals he needs to observe. So Ada needs to always wear a sapphire necklace, preferably a sapphire with an inclusion in it, which is a pocket of air around a silver chain, not around it, attached to a silver chain around her neck, and then every once in a while in the fireplace in her chamber, they need to burn some aspen, broom, and I know this, aspen, broom, juniper. There we go. I knew it. And this is just to make sure that she doesn't change back into a Striga, because there's always a danger of that happening. He also warns the king, okay, if you do that and she swoons for a few days and then she dies, burn her body immediately. Geralt also reassures the king, hey, your daughter wasn't cursed because she was a product of incest. A spell had to be cast. A curse had to be done, and it wasn't because you were boning your sister. Now, you probably were cursed by someone because they were upset you were boning your sister, but it wasn't because you put your P in her V directly. Next, we learn Geralt is in the old palace preparing for his fight with the Striga, which would not happen until after midnight. Here's where we see how a Witcher prepares for a battle, and we get more into this in other stories and books, but I think this is a really good first look. So in a small chest with metal fittings, Geralt has tightly packed compartments with dried grass that contain small vials of dark glass. These mixtures are used by Witchers to help them gain full control of their body and sharpen their hearing, seeing, and increase his reflexes and strength. Only those that were given these mixtures since childhood can survive taking them. And I really want to do a video on how you become a Witcher, a general lore video, so I'm trying to put that together right now because the process is so awesome. Fun enough, he actually talks a little bit about that process in later chapters. We also see his silver sword for mostly killing monsters for the first time. He unwraps a thick packet of sheepskin to reveal a sword with an elaborate hilt and a black shiny scabbard covered in rows of runic signs and symbols. The blade itself is made of pure silver. As he whispers incantations and drinks, the contents of the vials, he places his left hand on the blade of the sword after each sip. Geralt spends the night at the Old Palace, and during the beginning of his stay, Lord Ostrit attempts to get Geralt to run away, wanting the Striga to live. This bribe is to make it so eventually the citizens support Vizimir and his rule. In fact, there has been talk lately that people already view King Vizimir as their true monarch and savior. Instead of taking the bribe, Geralt knocks the man unconscious and ties him up when he tries to fight Geralt to get him out of there. Sadly, this is when it's revealed that Ostrit may have been the one to curse Ada. He was in love with her and angry that Falstis had slept with her, so he muttered a few angry words. Now, in the video game, it's very different. In the video game, we are explicitly told, yeah, it's him, he did it, he went out of his way to figure out the ingredients and the words he needed to say to have it done. But in the book, it's left open whether it was Ostrit or if it was Falstis and Ada's mother who did it. Also, Ostrit is made out to be a lot more sympathetic in the book than he ever is in the video games. Seriously, it's really different. Regardless, Geralt uses him as bait, and he is killed by the Striga. Geralt fights the monster, and by doing so believes the cure will work, that the princess isn't too far gone, or a lost cause. Through the use of a silver chain, though the Striga eventually breaks it, and wards, Geralt lands enough blows and then uses magic to project the hate and malice in her own mind against her, sending her terrified and running. Interestingly, Geralt is shocked by the level of hatred and murderous intent in the Striga's mind. He considers it way stronger than most bloodthirsty monsters he's come across, so that's a bit intense. With the Striga gone, he stays in the double coffin with the mummified Ada, not allowing the Striga to return. In the morning, Geralt discovers that she's cured. When he takes off his gloves to examine her now normal teeth, he realizes too late the girl is awake, and the third crow hasn't come from the rooster. With her still there tailing, she slashes him across the throat. He is able to subdue the girl with a headbutt and biting her neck when the third crowing of the rooster happens, and he is able to bind his neck and then faints. The Witcher wakes up to see Velerad, and he confirms to him that yes, the princess is saved, and assures him that he will have his 2 swords, all his equipment, and the 3,000 orens. He also tells Geralt that he was wrong in wanting the princess killed. Personally, this is my top favorite chapter just because you learn very quickly the man Geralt is. He kills some men in order to get the attention of those higher up, so that he can get the job. He is willing to sacrifice a man to get the job done. Geralt tries not to take a side of good or evil, just doing his job as a witcher, taking out magical monsters, and sometimes that involves regular people biting the dust. This story is so good that when they were developing the first Witcher game, they started a cinematic sequence with this story, so that's how you know it's good. Alright, so besides this chapter breakdown, there is going to be a lore video on the Striga, and there's also going to be a podcast episode where I talked with a special guest about this first chapter and the flashback story. So stay tuned for that.